I know I've met a lot of you guys, but not everybody. My name's Todd Nightingale. I'm the VP of Strategy and Systems Architecture here at Meraki. And I'm pretty new, to be honest. We've met a lot of people with 7 and 5.5 and that many years of experience. I've got just about 2 months under my belt here, which is admittedly basically nothing. That's why I need Pablo. But I've been doing Wi-Fi for quite a while. I started working for a Wi-Fi silicon company back when people were debating whether or not you would ever really need 5 gig. Maybe 11A was a pipe dream. No one would ever use it because it was too expensive to make chips for it. I did silicon development for a few years. I've been on the product development side on systems, on WIPS systems, on AP systems, all of that stuff. So from a Wi-Fi point of view, I do have a little bit of depth. But most of my experience, especially recently, especially field experience as a GM, has always been on the enterprise, really on like the biggest of enterprise engagements. And it was interesting, Sanjit and the team asked me to say a couple words about why I came to Meraki. And I thought about it a little bit. I thought about it a lot back when I was deciding to come. And I guess it came down to this. I've been working with enterprise accounts for a long time, and I see the needs that they've had for a while, right? They really, truly need differentiated access. They've got highly secure parts of their network. They have their core corporate network. They need different levels of guest network, probably BYOD, especially recently. And so enterprise networks have highly differentiated access. They've got lots of security concerns. Frequently, they have some type of card holder, some type of intellectual property parts of their network. They've got security concerns that legitimately an APT-style, advanced persistent threat style attack could legitimately go after or legitimately want to go after. And they've got complicated physical problems, right? Lots of sites, very big sites, whatever it happens to be. And there's a lot of other reasons why enterprise accounts, large deals really require these kind of enterprise accounts that all of you guys are familiar with deploying, right? And as consultants and thought leaders, a lot of time we look to you to tell us, what these people really need, or what the right questions to ask are. I guess the trend that I saw, and I think that Meraki saw also, was like the days of those networks being for the Fortune 100 are kind of over. Almost everyone needs those networks now. The idea of differentiated access, a 100-person law firm needs differentiated access. They've got secure parts of the network and unsecure parts of the network. No real data is not on their network somewhere. Everything that's important has to be secured. Everyone has network security concerns. Everyone needs differentiated access. All of the needs that used to be kind of Fortune 100, Fortune 500 requirements have pushed down to the rest of the rest of the world, right? Now the Fortune 10,000 need the features that the Fortune 100 used to need. And I think there's problems with that, especially when you think about the legacy traditional hardware. What Meraki sort of gives you, or what the Meraki vision I think is that those features, true enterprise networks, can be delivered without difficult CLIs, hours and hours of training, weeks, sometimes months of training required, without very, very large IT staffs to manage. And without that, we're going to be in trouble, as all of the rest of these organizations wind up needing what is essentially the kind of true enterprise networks that everyone here is used to working on, consulting for, all of that stuff. And I think, at least from my point of view, that's where Meraki sort of comes in, right? The cloud management that we talk a lot about is a means to an end, and the end that it's a means to is really about ease of use, lower total cost of ownership, making it easier and really making it viable for lots of organizations to stage, deploy, build, own, operate, and thanks to a lot of the newest stuff, gain unprecedented visibility into those networks. And I think at least that's why I'm here. That's why I'm excited about it. As far as that goes, Meraki's been in kind of the mid-sized enterprises for a long time, education for a long time, all that stuff. And business has grown, and I think the need's been fulfilled, but we find our customer base and our partner community as well pulling us up market, pulling us up into those larger enterprise accounts, because even the large enterprise accounts have a lot of the needs that kind of the smaller ones did too. Like, my CEO demands that his iPod and his iPad are on the network, so I need a system that has some kind of integrated MDM. I absolutely need to support BYOD, whereas the top corporations used to be able to say, no, I'm out, that's against policy, and they would stand by it. That's no longer acceptable, right? So all of the extra visibility, extra management, extra control is really required instead of being able to enforce the policy. And at the end of the day, even those large enterprises are interested in that lower TCO, right? And if that means they don't have to train their teams and push out 100-person IT staffs to do a wireless deployment, then like all the better, right? And I think from Meraki's point of view right now, as you'll see, kind of the features and the features are developing and the customers are developing them for. It's all about making the solution more and more comprehensive, and for some of those features, making it more and more viable for larger and larger enterprises.
How much do you see the schools that Meraki has worked with now, how their methods of dealing with large and changing user populations with their own devices has moved up into the upper enterprise space?
I guess what I would say about that is I see them requiring more management and control, but it's not exactly the same type of stuff that maybe a large retailer might want or might care about. Retailers talk a lot about PCI certification. I've never heard a school talk about that. But what schools do talk about are, I've got school-owned devices, I've got teacher-owned devices, I've got student-owned devices, and I need differentiated access. So the BYOD feature set and the way that needs to be orchestrated carries over very cleanly. So I'd say it's feature set to feature set, or maybe section to section. One thing that carries over in a very big way, and I think has been proven out by the huge uplift of the MX and the MS model, is the fact that having a single access layer vendor has some great advantages on both sides, and that I think is certainly driving the success that we've seen on the Back to the Future style. Any other questions, guys? So, what we wanted to do was to start off with a demo, actually a couple customer demos that Pablo has been nice enough to set up for us. Are we going to do the WIPs one first?
If you'd like, we can just go over that page. I think Kieran talked about it already.
Okay, well, yeah, we can talk WIPs at the end, but let's do the Applebee's one.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know, everyone's been to an Applebee's. I think it's the largest Applebee's franchise right now. It's called
Apple American Group.
Apple American Group. They've got 300 locations. They use Meraki Wi-Fi primarily for guest access. So really, all of that layer 7 visibility that we've been talking about comes into play in a real way. And do you want to just take them through?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Todd, for that introduction. So for those of you who I haven't met on the line, online or in person upstairs, I'm Pablo Estrada. You might remember from the previous wireless field day, yes, I did have a mustache, exactly. A little bit different this time. So we asked a couple of customers for their permission to show you their networks during wireless field day. So I'm really excited that I get to kind of drive the steering wheel here and show you these, starting off with Apple American Group. Of course, as Todd mentioned, I'm sure you know Applebee's has a franchise model. They are the largest Applebee's franchisee. They're also the second largest franchise operator of any model in the world. So very impressive deployment. They have over 300 locations, more than 20,000 employees. And what we're looking at here is the overview of their organization on a Google map. Now you can see their concentration is roughly around the coasts and in the Midwest as well. So we're going to dive into a few of these, or just one of them we'll pick. But from this area, we could go in and dive in on a particular location or a group of locations, and also see the activity that's been going on in these networks over the past week. You'll see as I hover over these areas, we can see not only the ones that light up in Minnesota there, but also in the throughput graph, what percentage those restaurants represent in terms of the total usage. So why don't we pick this one here, which is up in New England. And by doing this, we go into a similar view, but now this is organized in the way that they've organized their deployments, which is by region. In this case, New England, of course. Now, in this view, we could, again, get some high-level information about what's happening on the network. If there was any alerting access point, if it had been offline, maybe the power was tripped, for example, we could immediately see it here, and it would show up as an access point in a different color. But right now, everything looks healthy. There have been 1,500, almost 1,600 clients that connected in the past day, approaching 12 gigabytes of data. And here you can see that usage over the past week. Now, with this even large deployment and distribution of sites across New England, of course, it's important to be able to quickly get to the information that an administrator is looking for. And that's done very easily by clicking in on one of those icons or, of course, searching here. And being a very organized entity, they've entered the location numbers for their restaurants. So we can enter in, for example, 3132 and find East Main and go right into that restaurant, or we can go right into Portland.
The AP or the restaurant with multiple?
So most of these restaurants have one access point. So in this case, we're just going in on a particular restaurant and can dive into the access point here. For example, there are two in Portland, or Portland and South Portland. And from here, we could dive right in to investigate more about what's happening right now. If we wanted to ping the AP, for example, or check throughput, check interference, check for rogues, and so on. Certainly, we could dive deeply into this, or any location that we wanted to right from here. But one of the most exciting things about what we've seen in, especially retail, is the way that our customers are looking to use the infrastructure to provide an enhanced customer experience. And this is really the realization of what Kieran was talking about in terms of that effect of the Apple Store and its propagation to everywhere, even places like Applebee's. And so, of course, Applebee's is using Wi-Fi to provide a network and a service for their guests. They also want to know, what are their guests doing? How many are showing up? What kinds of devices are they connecting with? And then, where's all the bandwidth going? In this case, we're looking at 9,800, almost 10,000 devices that connected over the past week. And we can search for any one of a number of devices. For example, how many iPads are showing up? 396 iPads. How many iPhones? 4,000 plus iPhones. And for those of you who are curious, on Android? Two, no. 3,300 Android devices.
How do you do the device fingerprinting?
Great question. How do we do the device fingerprinting? So the system automatically looks at little bits of identifying traffic that flow across the network. And
the HTTP?
One thing is the browser user agent. Yeah. It also uses the DHCP activity and MAC addresses. It also looks at things like Bonjour traffic and NetBIOS information. So it's taking all these pieces of data, and of course, it knows how to recognize what they mean. And once we get to here, the administrator simply has to search. There's nothing that you have to configure to get this. As long as there are devices connecting and passing traffic, then you'll be able to search like that. So great way to quickly find devices. Of course, if there's a particular user, maybe that's having trouble connecting, we can search for that device too.
How long
Yes.
do clients stay on the table for
So right now we're looking at the last week of data. We can also go in here and look at the last month. And beyond that, if we wanted to look at higher level summary reports, which have the kind of the most important information, we could scroll back to as far back as that network has been deployed. Yeah.
Are you recording where they're going to?
What do you mean where they're going to? You mean on the network?
Websites and.
Yeah, so let me touch on that right now, because one thing that is very interesting for these retailers is to understand not only the profile in terms of what kind of device they have in their pocket, but really what are they doing on the network when they show up, right? And we can do that for an individual client, or we can do that by looking at things like this pie chart. So here we can see where the 100 plus gigabytes are going for the past week. You can see a lot of iTunes traffic, audio traffic, general web surfing as well, social media, no surprise there, right? And we have the top 20 apps here, but we can expand that out And there are actually hundreds of apps that, in a similar way to how clients are automatically fingerprinted and identified, the apps are also identified in that way. And to answer maybe a part of your question more directly, today we do not provide the individual URL history for each device. You can see there's a chunk of traffic here for miscellaneous web.
I think one thing that's key here, in this case, for this feature, and this is one of the main reasons I think Meraki gets picked in this kind of group, Applebee's considers themselves more like a hospitality group. They don't talk about customers, they talk about guests, right? And they have to make a tough decision. There's no amount of bandwidth they could buy where every guest would get all the bandwidth they want. There's always someone who's BitTorrenting with his laptop in a booth somewhere, and it's just not really going to work out. So they are forced to make a decision, just like every hotel is forced to make a decision. What am I going to prioritize, or what am I going to shape, or what am I going to block in order that almost everyone gets a really great experience instead of some people get great experiences and some don't. How do I get the fairness and everything working perfectly, right? And one thing that we see a lot of people doing is they get their network out there, and then they start looking at this chart, right? And they see, all right, they like the idea of people using iTunes, and maybe Facebook is something they absolutely want to encourage people to use. But they might notice, look, iPhones, just when they get on my network, they upgrade all their software. And there's no reason that I should be paying for AT&T's devices to all be upgraded. So they could decide they want to block that one app. And actually, we see a lot of hospitality groups using this kind of feature to do exactly that. So the classification of applications is usually used not really as a curiosity, which it is curious, but it's also used in a really big way to help people decide how to tune their network. Where's my bandwidth going? And how do I shape it? How do I prioritize it? What kind of policies do I want to add? Right?
With this kind of deployments in mind, how is your 802.11 use support? So how do you look at that?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Raj to comment on that, actually.
Yeah, so we actually work with a number of carriers. For example, we have some pretty big carrier customers using things like eSIM authentication to talk to carrier HLRs, and we are looking very closely at specs like 802.11u as well in the future.
So kind of following up on Todd's comment there are many, many apps out there, of course, right? A few things that are not here are notable. Peer-to-peer is one that tends to take up a lot of bandwidth, can be a liability concern, and generally is not going to be invited on a network like this. So you'll see that that's not there. Dropbox isn't there either, and general online backup services aren't there. And that's because you might have a case where someone comes in with their laptop, they're going on Facebook, or they're watching a YouTube video, and in the background, they might not even realize that they are syncing with an online backup, and all of a sudden, there goes 5 gigabytes of data up through the internet connection through this link, and they didn't even know it. So Applebee's doesn't want to have that type of traffic impact their network, so they're using a layer 7 firewall that's built into the AP to block explicitly peer-to-peer traffic, Dropbox, and other online backup services. So that's a great example. We're not going to go into the config here, but a great example of how Applebee's is taking this information and using some of the built-in tools to enhance that network experience. Another thing I'd like to go into just for a bit is to talk about how this is really providing a service to the guests that are there. Applebee's is also interested in using the network in an interactive way with their guests. And so what they've done is they've integrated the splash pages that are part of Meraki's APs with their system to offer promotions. So if you go to Applebee's and you connect to the splash page, you might notice something like this. Half price off late night appetizers. Right? So next time you go, make sure you pay attention to the splash page. You might find a deal there. They're using this because they see that as a part of providing that enhanced guest experience in a way that they can use the network not only to provide connectivity, but really differentiate themselves from their competitors and connect more with their customers. Okay, so one last thing on the Applebee's network that I'd like to touch on is how they deal with large-scale network management. Now, we're looking at New England here. They have several dozen, maybe 100 locations in this area. Being the second largest operator of any franchise model, they really know how to get things done. So they're going to do that through something called Config Sync. And this is a great tool that is just one of the things that we've built to really help network managers and IT teams manage very large-scale networks. You'll notice here there's a source network, and we can pick from any of the networks that are part of the organization. But sure enough, there's one called staging. And then we can choose target networks, to which it's going to hold down the command key here and just choose a few. And we're going to take configuration settings from this source network, the staging one, and push them out to all these other networks. So now we're deploying configuration changes for the whole network or for the individual SSIDs. Maybe we're changing a promotion. Maybe we're changing the time of day that they turn on and off because the restaurant times, their opening times, their business times have changed. And all we need to do is go here, look to see if they're the same, look to see if they're different, copy settings from one to another, and that's it. And that way they can really operate at a much more efficient scale that's really necessary when you have this many locations deployed.
I think the staging is another key thing, and we don't we don't always talk about enough. You know, the ease of staging out and deploying a network. We do talk about how the mounting kits and everything being included, all that stuff, make it as easy as possible to get them mounted up. But getting them configured and provisioned winds up being a huge cost to a lot of people. And I myself have been involved in large-scale network deployments where serial cables were used to stage devices. And I think that this really is like the death of that. If anyone is taking devices out of boxes to stage them before they put them in their final, send them out to their final location, like that's really the, that was really the last time.
Then pre-configured to call your controller, and you tie it to what, the serial number or whatever, to tie it to the customer?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? You drop in Meraki APs, they're gonna phone back to the cloud.
So
and
what ports do you need to have open for the communication?
So we have a list of ports that actually are outbound ports, and if for whatever reason that doesn't work, the access points will fall back to port 80 to communicate through there. So in most cases, it's just going to work. Great. So
I think that we looked at the Applebee's network and the Applebee's America network, and I think this is primarily used for guests. They maybe do a little bit of corporate stuff on it, but most of what they do here is guest network. We want to take a look at one more retailer that really uses it on the corporate side only. So there's a retailer, Next. I don't know if you're familiar with Next. It's a high-end clothing retailer, some housewares in the UK. I walked through a few of them when I met with the Next guys a couple weeks ago. Maybe it looks like a J. Crew or Banana Republic. Don't quote me on that, but it's high-end clothing, high-end. They have a very premier kind of customers, and a lot of what they want to do and what they're implementing right now is a really advanced user experience or shopper experience, so that associates are carrying around iPads and they're able to interact with customers, with shoppers in real time. At the same time, they have all their kind of standard corporate retail style devices, mobile computers, scanners that they're using for inventory and all that stuff. So this is a large network. I think it's 3,000 APs or so. And what they're using it for is, right now, straight up and down corporate Wi-Fi.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what
Yep.
and I think what we'll take a look at here is see how they kind of use the same system, but they've organized it differently a little bit. And really, they're using it completely different purpose, right? We're not talking about guests now. We're talking about corporate Wi-Fi, high security, point of sale, PCI, all of that stuff.
Thanks, Todd. So like Todd mentioned, this is roughly a 3,000 AP deployment. They're a leading retailer in the UK. And their deployment story, touching on what Todd said earlier about staging on deployment, is very exciting too. That they were actually able to deploy over 570 locations in about 12 weeks. They were actually super efficient with their deployment, seeing 20, sometimes 25 stores going live online on a single night. They were doing this after hours, naturally. And so now they're at a place where this is the network list of all those locations. And they've also sorted them by their location plus their store number. And here we can look at, for example, all the stores in Manchester and find those. Or we can go into London and find one of those. Very easy to get to the store or region that we want to. And I'll just pick one here, which is one of their largest stores overall, definitely the largest in Manchester. And click over to the Google satellite. And here, as Todd mentioned, they're using it for straight up and down corporate operations. They actually took a look at a wireless deployment because they had employees with scanners. They would scan inventory and product and actually walk back to put those scanners back in the cradle and have to synchronize those devices. They calculated the cost of having employees do that versus the weight of having to invest in wireless. And they figured out that their investment in wireless would pay off in about 18 months. And after that, of course, they would have a platform on top of which they could deploy enhanced guest services, offer mobile POS, guest Wi-Fi, things like that. And so they're already starting to actively investigate things like iPads for their stores. But if we look right now at this particular location, you'll see the list of devices here. These are all scanners. And you can click in on one of them. We'll just pick this one because it's online right now. The client fingerprinting that we showed earlier, Android, iPhone, iPad, Windows, etc. Even devices like Symbol, right? This is a Symbol scanner. It's currently online, even though it's kind of late at night in the UK right now. 47 dB signal strength, so it's very, very strong. And from here, they could do all of the monitoring, all of the troubleshooting from a centralized place with the dashboard. And of course, they have the same tools that we showed for Apple American Group in terms of that large-scale network management that's needed for 575 locations. So AJ's giving me the sign. I have about 10 seconds left. Do you have any remaining questions?
Are they actually looking at using this for any interactive customer-facing applications?
Yeah, so part of their strategy is to use things like iPads or other tablets to enable their employees to interact with guests.
We're under an NDA with them. They actually have some very interesting applications when it comes to how they want to interact with the shoppers, with the customers, and it all uses the Wi-Fi network. But I think they're pretty forward-thinking. Like they have some out-of-the-box ideas there, around kiosks, around.
It seems to me like a lot of retail organisations are moving towards that model of trying to interact with their customers more and keep them in the store.
Yeah, one thing we see a lot of retailers talking about is kind of this idea of next-gen retail customer interaction. Use the wireless to drive top-line revenue, to drive high-margin business. And that seems to come up more and more with retailers right now, dramatically more than it did even 6 months ago. Okay, I think we're out of time, but we do have Q&A.
We actually have a tour next.
We have a tour next, Q&A again. So, thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.